Thank you, everyone. That was, we've been here a while, and we've heard quite a bit. I think we should open it up to other people. We've got a microphone there. I know you don't like that kind of thing, but we'll have to do it that way. Just come up to, feel free to come up to the microphone. If you have questions, keep them focused and short so that people can have a chance to talk, and then we'll take a few of those at a time and let anyone answer. So, yeah.
Okay, so my question for all the panelists, if you have any notes about having an event like this, the irony that Lena has mentioned, having an event like this, not just in an elitist space, but also a settler colony in Harlem, and also a space that is highly policed, and a group of us who were denied entrance for whatever reasons before the event started were actually asked by the organizers to leave the floor immediately, and I'm quoting verbatim, and then security approached us and asked us to leave, and when we asked what rules are being enacted and that we would be happy to oblige if the rules are pointed out, we were asked for our IDs. He took a picture of my ID, and I was threatened that my name would be given to my dean, which is, I mean, I gave him my name happily. I mean, if he would give my name to my dean, then it would only make the point clearer. And then security reinforcements came to deal with this apparent security threat. So I'm not trying to center ourselves here because, again, we are privileged students in an elitist university and part of colonizing Harlem. But my question is more about this, this system of policing that is proliferating and promoting itself even in an event about carceral politics. And thank you so much.
Yes, what impact has been studied on those who have disabilities in the prison system?
The question, so we have one about our location and the activity of carceral politics here in our space, and this is about disability issues in
well, I mean, for
carceral
those,
politics?
Those prisoners who have disabilities, has it been studied how they've been impacted?
We're going to take a few questions so that they can answer altogether. So we have disability. Thank you.
Is it my turn? It's hard to follow those up. I have a lot of questions. Don't worry, I won't read all this. These are my notes. I guess the first question is, and this might be redundant perhaps if it was covered early on in the talk, I was also denied admission initially and then later on. I don't understand how things work at this school. I'm not a student here. But anyways, I wanted to ask two questions. So with respect to the, the vibrant BDS work we see growing in the United States, and with that comes the opposition to the BDS work, particularly in the language that people use. So if you support BDS, you're anti-Israeli, and literally like all, I think what's that post? Is it the Post, the paper that starts out with page 6? On that paper, I was reading recently that the boycott divestment campaign with respect to the co-op here in Brooklyn. It failed, and this anti-Israeli measure failed. So I guess my question is, with respect to the language, how do we really sort of shift the dialogue in the way we frame this work? Because I think the opposition will continue to grow in this really dichotomous. It's like if you support BDS work, then you're anti-Israeli. And it's just, as a Palestinian American, I just really struggle with always being pushed back. And I know that. And with respect to the abolition movement here, I don't even think we're even at a place to talk about Palestinian prisoners in the way that we position ourselves to talk about prisoners here, because the assumption is with all prisoners that they did something wrong, right? But I think with the Palestinian prisoners, it's this this notion that it's acceptable to have collective punishment for an entire people. So how do we again shift that dialogue and then build those connections with the activism abolitionist movement here? And then one last question. This one, I guess, is to Professor Davis, which is, so in your book, No More Prisons, critiquing the prisons in this country, you specifically talk about, the 13th Amendment. What sort of parallel, this is, I guess, to anyone, what sort of parallel do we have in Israel with the laws that specifically codify and create the legal system by which one can legitimately incarcerate for security reasons Palestinians? Sorry for being long-winded. Thank you all.
Thank you. Should we take these now? Can we take a couple more?
All right, can I take one more question?
Okay, one more, and
Okay.
then we'll try it, because they won't be able to remember
this is
everything.
gonna be a fast one.
Thank you.
So I'm just wondering, in respect to thinking about pinkwashing in Israel, what is the role of queer identities in prison? So.
Thank you. Should come next week. Okay, can we, anybody want to answer any of those? Whoever wants to go first.
Well, I think
Yeah.
the first question is...
Can you use the mic? Can everybody hear? Oh, yeah.
I think it's important that you point out the degree to which we often routinely accept modes of security that appear to be less harmful, but as a matter of fact, they prepare us to accept larger, they prepare us to accept the security state. And I'll just tell this story that I constantly think about. Many, many years ago, I was in Northern Ireland, and I was invited by women involved in the civil rights movement there. And I couldn't understand how they could basically submit to all of the security processes. And whenever you go into a mall, your purse has to be. And then years later, after 9/11, when we acquired the habit of disrobing and doing all kinds of things in order to get on a plane, it became clear that that if we're not conscious of the degree to which we are also implicated, we continue to be responsible for the larger, more harmful modes of security. Now, the question that was asked by the second, I think I'll do the first and the second one, and then I'll let you all do the third and the fourth. The second question, which has to do with disability issues, prisoners and disability, and I can tell you that within less than a year, an anthology edited by a woman who she should be receiving her PhD soon, maybe this June, who's an anti-Zionist Jewish activist whose name is Liat Ben Moshe. She's editing also a collection of articles on disability and the question of the prison. And in response to the other question, I'll just make another plug for another book of one of my graduate students did that's called Captive Genders, which is about the trans experience within prisoners, and not only about the experience of trans prisoners, but about the importance of taking up the issue of gender non-conformity in relationship to the apparatus of the prison, allowing us to recognize the extent to which the prison itself encourages and promotes gender binaries and has an impact on larger ideological formations, and not only on those who sustain the direct effect of transphobia behind bars. And his name is Eric Stanley, and it's called Captive Genders. It's a nice anthology.
Thank you.
No, I just want to push a little bit what you said, because I think that even before talking about the state as a security state, or even if it was a really democratic liberal state, it is a state that should be called as it is. It's a settler colonial state, and it was just constituted by the extermination of the natives. So it's, even if it's not a security state, so we need to ask also these questions. And I don't have any other thing to say, but it's an irony.
It's true. Absolutely.
I think, well, first of all, when we talk about disability, we have to talk about disabilities that are produced through violent treatment and torture, and then we can talk about disabilities that pre-exist that. So my sense is that there are two different questions. One has to do with physical restrictions that emerge as a result of torture or violent treatment, and the second one has to do with whether appropriate health care is provided. And at least in my readings about Palestinian prisoners, appropriate health care is not provided, nor is there anything that we might remotely think of as accessibility. It's a kind of joke thinking about the way prisons are constructed to make sure there is no accessibility for anyone. When one seeks to defend the BDS movement and is told that it is anti-Israel, I think there is really only one response that is possible, and that is to say that the BDS movement is a struggle to achieve justice, and that it has three main goals. One is the end to the occupation. The second is the institutionalization of equality for Jewish and non-Jewish Israeli citizens. And the third is the right of return. And those are all fundamental issues of equality and justice. And if to be, when people say it's anti-Israel, and don't respond to those issues, then they're implicitly saying that one needs to defend Israel even in the face of the injustices it performs, at which point they're left with a contradictory and appalling political position. So my short answer is you do not engage that question directly. And you will note how quickly the argument can move to, are you for, are you pro-Israel, are you anti-Israel, as if we're talking about soccer teams, right? And we're actually talking about fundamental issues of justice, and it has to be brought back to that. Don't let it get absorbed into the pro-anti-Israel framework. It's very, very important to resist that. As for queer identities in prison, I don't know. I do know that the word queer is a complicated word in the Palestinian context, but if you look at Palestinian queers for BDS or Al-Cause, you will see there that queer is less an identity than a political analysis that refuses to accept homophobia and refuses to accept occupation and will not trade one for the other, okay? And it also refuses the idea that Palestine is somehow a haven for homophobia and Israel is not, which is, I think, finally a racist and ignorant claim. But I think we also have to be clear about how sexuality functions in different ways. It doesn't always circle around or focus on or become defined by the idea of identity, and it certainly doesn't always become focused on or organized by the idea of outness. And once we put those two things in perspective, we might have a different conversation about sexuality politics in Palestine.
Can I just also say that there's a pinkwashing event next Wednesday Tuesday. The 10th, whatever the April 10th is, at 8 o'clock at Barnard. So you should look out for those signs if you want to pursue that further. I think we want to hear from a few more people. Thank you.
Hi. So first of all, thank you all so much. This has been really amazing. I actually want to thank Professor Davis. I was actually about to ask about trans experiences in prison, and then you spoke about it. So I was wondering, just addressing to the panel and generally, you could speak more about the ways, gendered forms of violence in the prison, and particularly the ways that we narrate gender. What does it mean to talk about Palestinian women or Palestinian men, or what does it mean to talk about women and men in prison, and how do we narrate trans experiences when part of the trans struggle is even being able to claim, the struggle to even be able to claim the identity or the subject position of being a man or being a woman. So how do we narrate those within experiences of gendered violence and gender segregated spaces, under a military occupation or under the prison industrial complex? Thank you.
Thank you. We'll take two more.
Hi, thank you all for coming. Being an Israeli veteran who's both pro-Israel and pro-Palestinian, obviously, your presentations were very, very powerful to me, and I do appreciate you guys very much for coming. That said, given the idea that a non-prisoner society or non-prison society is a beautiful ideal, given the current situation, more importantly, just as if the Israeli side must be held accountable, so too must malicious acts by the Palestinian side also be held accountable. What would you all believe would be a proper alternative to the situation that clearly needs to change? Thank you.
Hi, I'd like to thank you again also for your invaluable contributions today. I suppose my question is about space, about architecture, and it's about the prison as a structure in itself. I don't know about the United States, but in Israel at least, there's a tendency, a lot of historians have been working on this, of kind of symbolically reappropriating particular spaces which have resonance to Palestinians. So it's not uncommon that actual sites where prisons are built, or sometimes mental asylums, that those actual sites had a special resonance to Palestinians in the past. So I cite Deir Yassin, for example, where there's a famous Israeli mental asylum in that space. And my question is, in relation to prisons that are like that, what kind of an effect would you say that has essentially on the prisoners and on society at large, that there is this kind of reappropriation going on? Thank you.
Thanks. Do you want to take any of those? Lena, do you want to take anything?
Well, because my approach would be how, if you're asking about Palestinian prisoners, how they also re-signify this. Because I have a lot of interviews with ex-Palestinian prisoners who, for example, there were one Palestinian political prisoner, he's from Haifa, and his family was expelled in 1948 from Haifa, and they were living like in the West Bank. And then when he was imprisoned, he was put in a prison in Haifa. So for him, he was telling that how he felt that this was like a way to get back, to return to his hometown. And again, it's how the resignifications of these things. The other thing, I had an interview with an Islamist political activist, and during his interrogation, he was interrogated in Al-Maskoubiye, which is an interrogation center in Jerusalem. And he went under a very prolonged interrogation, and everyone was supporting him because he was tortured very violently. And in his accounts, he's saying that for him, this time was being in the Holy Land, where he felt that he's so close to God. So it's also interesting, not just reading prison and imprisonment from the perspective of power, also trying to read them from the perspective of those who are resisting, because I think that the engagement with those who are resisting will also change a lot of things and will also encourage us to be in solidarity with resistors and not just focusing on the technologies of power.
I wanted to say to the gentleman who claimed to be pro-Israel and pro-Palestinian, I really do think the pro thing really has to go. I mean, I don't understand it. It's as if we're in a, you know, we're all pom-pom girls, or, you know, we're rooting for our soccer team. I mean, I understand what it means to root for a soccer team, but these are not soccer teams, and they're not two parties who meet each other on equal terrain. We are actually talking about an ongoing situation of settler colonialism that uses and deploys carceral politics to reproduce itself through time and space in very, very particular ways. So we have to ask, you know, when we talk about malicious acts, for instance, is the bombing of Gaza, and is that a malicious act, or is that state-sponsored violence that is considered to be legitimate and a legitimate security act, whereas those who resist such bombings or who resist being dispossessed or expelled are understood to be committing crimes. We have to think about how the language of crime and punishment is ideological in the sense that Angela has made very, very clear, and how that relates to the state monopoly on violence, right? And how that gets called legitimate, how it gets called security, and then what becomes crime in relationship to that state violence. And it's why we can't I think easily accept that framework for the adjudication of the problem. We have to ask politically what does the language of crime do, and who can become criminal, and who is already and from the start exonerated from criminality. One question I have, and I think it's for Lena really, is I really enjoyed the description of resistance and of Samud in particular, the doubleness of not confessing and not acknowledging. But I was wondering whether that I understand it as a practice of resignifying, and even as a bodily practice of resignifying. Is it also a mode of solidarity? How do we understand it as something that is produced serially among many people who are nevertheless sometimes forcibly, spatially separated from one another? How do we think about solidarity in that resistance practice?
Well, yeah, why don't you respond first?
Okay. Well, I think that thinking about Sumud, and again in both as a political strategy and as a theoretical, philosophical frame, and I'm trying also to think recognition and what does recognition mean. But then I think also following the life that Sumud took for itself, we can see how Sumud was not just like an ownership of the one who's practicing Sumud. Sumud, through the 80s, early 90s, became something that is the ownership of the whole community. People were, if someone was arrested, everyone would think about those who are arrested, would be waiting to hear. Because if someone practiced Sumud, this means that this potentiality of revolutionary subjectivity was actualized within this moment, and this means victory to all the community. The other thing, it became, there's a genealogy for Sumud, but also it became part of the public culture. You'll hear hundreds of songs about Sumud. You'll see that in specific areas, people who practiced Sumud in the interrogation became, in a sense, the heroes which in that area. So people who are from marginalized classes or geographical areas became the representatives of the Palestinian revolutionary subjectivity through their sumud. So sumud affected a lot also of changes. The last thing I'll say, it's also affected the ethical, intimate relations, and all of this is intertwined with politics. It's like these connectivity to the comrades. To practice sumud means to bear the torture in order not to provide information about comrades, which the one who's under torture, through their body, flesh, and blood, they need to protect the collective of the comrades, the community, and the resistant movement. So there is something that is beyond the singular who is practicing.
Okay, well, I know there was the question about gender that you raised. And I just want to say a couple of words. I mean, of course, there are many ways in which one could approach your question, but I'm going to say something that's sort of hard to say, particularly in the context of Palestine, and that is, how do we recognize the gendered violence, both in terms of the state violence and in terms of violence that happens in intimate relationships, often perpetrated precisely by those who have played such an important role in the struggle for freedom. And I mean, I think that's an important question about gender. It's related to the issue of the gendered character of imprisonment, precisely because when we look at prison populations, political prisoners and other prisoners all over the world, they're overwhelmingly male. And we often assume that it's simply because women don't do the things that cause them to end up in prison, whether it's a political act or whether it's a criminal act. But I think that if we again disarticulate the crime and punishment, or political acts and punishment, we begin to see that there are other reasons why people end up behind bars. Some people do and some people don't. And that as a matter of fact, there's a kind of punishment that's inflicted on women in a way that represents a kind of delegation by the state to punish women within private contexts. So I think it's important to look at violence against women, which we tend to think we can eradicate simply by criminalizing it. And the fact is that over the last 30 years or so, the criminalization of violence against women has led to many, many more perpetrators of violence against women landing in prison, but it has not at all had an impact on the incidence of violence against women. So I think it would be really important, especially within a context like Palestine, I think, to try to address some of those really hard questions and develop modes of activism that allow us to be attentive to both expressions of violence. And then the other question about accountability, I totally agree with you, Judith, about the soccer team approach. But at the same time, I think we can think about accountability. And there's accountability that doesn't necessarily have to be resolved by or addressed by the institution of the prison. And I thought about this story I heard about a South African woman during the Truth and Reconciliation hearings whose husband and sons were killed by a South African I think it was either a policeman or some official. And so when they went before the Truth and Reconciliation panel, she was asked what she wanted to be done to this man who had killed her husband, and I think it was 2 sons. And she said, well, I have no one left, and so I want you to come to my house every day. I want you to provide me with some companionship, which I've lost. And she went on, and I mean, of course, it was absolutely unimaginable, but this is what she wanted. This is how she thought that this man could be made accountable for his acts. And I think it's really important to begin to imagine other ways of achieving justice rather than always relying on vengeance and retribution.
You know, I'm a little worried about the time. And I wonder if we could leave ourselves with those last words and maybe do a little bit informally afterwards, and appreciate it if you would give up your questions, and thank the panelists so much for this.